Good morning, everyone, to our audience here and, of course, to our audience streaming as well. Before we begin, I just want to remind everyone, if you're using social media, please use hashtag WEF25. My name is Diana Olick. I'm CNBC's senior climate correspondent, and because I'm a reporter, I'm going to start off with a little bit of news. Today, the Global Plastic Action Partnership, it was founded in 2018 with the vision to support countries by 2025 to implement action against plastic pollution. And today, barely into 2025, they're announcing that this wonderful achievement is achieved. So let's have a round of applause for them. Thank you. We're here to talk plastics. We're talking about the new global treaty on plastics. This treaty aims to limit the production of unnecessary plastics, promote the reuse and recycling of plastics, and reduce the amount of plastic waste entering the environment, particularly marine environments. The treaty pushes a circular economy, that is, keep plastic in use as long as possible, recycle it to reduce waste. And then, of course, there is the sustainable consumption and production with a focus on minimizing risk to human health and the environment. International cooperation and collaboration is key. So where are we now? Well, during the fifth session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, that's INC5, in Korea late last year, more than 3,300 delegates from 170 nations and observers from more than 440 organizations participated in discussions. But as yet, we still have no treaty. And so that's what we're here to discuss. But for some opening remarks, I'd like to begin with Inger Andersen and introduce her to the podium. She is the Executive Director of the United Nations Environmental Program. Please kick us off.
Thank you very much, and Your Excellency, Madam President, Mr. Minister, and all distinguished guests here. Look, we are getting there. It is not easy. Treaty making is not done overnight. But we've been in 2 years of talks, and I remind you that other talks for other global treaties have taken considerably longer. But we are seeking to secure a treaty for the ages, a treaty that hits the problem of plastic pollution hard and protects human, planetary, and economic health. And we have reached a degree of convergence, and that's important. We have a text of 22 pages, and 29 out of 32 articles, whilst not agreed, are looking like they could be agreed, and they are proposed to make up the bulk of the treaty text. There are some areas that are still in contention. One, products, including the use of chemicals. Second, and in no particular order, sustainable consumption and production. And third, financing, including the financial mechanism and how to align financial flows. But there is a very strong determination across member states, across communities, across science, and across much of industry. But a big political push is needed, because what we need to convert into a deal in the coming months, we need that big political and diplomatic push with the engagement of all stakeholders and a strong G20 leadership. I look here at my friend, the minister from South Africa, to lay the ground for INC5 too. Now, business has a critical role to play, and they have been engaged from the start, as do NGOs, another critical role to play. Business has been pivotal in calling for global rules, which we appreciate, in calling for EPR, extended producer responsibility, that will make it easier for business to do their job with efficiency. And also, they've been clear and can continue to be clear on their expectations on chemical additives of concern in plastic products where there are exposure risks. Now, the absence of action will have a high cost to everyone. The plastic leakage into the environment is projected to grow under a business-as-usual scenario by 50% by 2040. And the cost of damages from plastic pollution are predicted to rise as high as a cumulative 281 trillion between 2016 and 2040. And you can think of it from anywhere to tourism income lost from beaches that have to be cleaned up, to rivers that are contaminated, to fisher folks that get more plastic than fish, and on it goes. And just as the costs are growing, so are the risks to businesses. Because consumers and shareholders and markets are beginning to move, and that's the exciting bit. Consumers will eventually vote with their dollars or their euros or their shillings, and markets will move faster, we expect. And so businesses, the choice is increasingly clear. Don't wait, but be at the front line. Don't risk being left behind. Act now and step into that leadership. So finally, what is it that needs to get done? We have a text, as I mentioned, that promotes and encourages and ensures that we need to have a reduction in the production of single-use and short-lived plastics. We need to have policies on extended producer responsibility and hopefully also some degree of recycling targets. We need to think innovatively regarding chemicals of concern, drawing inspiration from prevailing international frameworks that protect us against exposure risk. We need to ensure that in locations where mechanical recycling is done at basic technology level, and that's particularly often the case in the global south, and often at SME level, that we prevent harmful chemicals from being in that mechanical recycled product that is being produced. We need to design products for refill, reuse, disassembly, and recycling. And we need to increase transparency and traceability and disclosures. We need to invest in environmentally sound waste management, obviously, and this needs to be emphasized. And we do need to tackle legacy cleanups, and obviously to put in place funding. And there's more to that list. But we are getting closer, and those three elements is what I ask that we focus on, and that we understand that there are differences, and it is important that we work together to come together in the middle of the big tent, while ensuring that the treaty text will eliminate plastic pollution, including in the marine environment. The world has agreed to end plastic pollution. All actors must now do their part to deliver on this promise, starting right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Andersen. I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel here. I'll just go from my right. We have first His Excellency Minister Dion Travers George. He is the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment for South Africa. We have Secretary Alicia Barcena Ibarra, Secretary of Environment and Natural Resources for Mexico. And of course, Hein Schumacher, CEO of Unilever. And last but not least, Sarah Lamaison, co-founder and CEO of Dioxycle. So let's begin. I'm going to start with Secretary Ibarra, if I may. What are Mexico's priorities going into INC 5.2? And in your opinion, what are the absolute must-haves to yield fruit?
Well, first of all, we believe that we have to have a life cycle approach, and we have to advocate for the entire life cycle of plastics, including production, consumption, and disposal, with the focus of eliminating legacy plastics. That's number one. Number two, we want legally binding obligations. And I know this is a red line for some countries, but not for us. We want binding global commitments to phase out harmful plastics and chemicals. And thirdly, we want human rights and equity, and that's why transparency is of an essence, precisely because we want to prioritize vulnerable groups that are exposed to plastics, and particularly because 58 to 62% of plastics go directly to landfills. And there is where many people are being exposed to these type of materials. And of course, fourth, financial mechanisms. We want robust financial structures, including technology transfer and so forth. We have key 2 points for the INC 5.2, the next INC, which is going to be the continuation of Busan. We want an agreement of global bans and phase out of harmful plastics and associated chemicals. I think this is a point that we need to emphasize. And secondly, binding product design standards to enable circular economy. And here, Mexico is willing to make very serious commitments. We have a commitment with the industry. We have more or less 80 companies already that are the 53% of the plastic producers that are already into the circular economy. I think that the PET company, the PET plants The largest PET plant existing in the world, I think in the developing world at least, is in Mexico. And we are working very closely with companies. You know, Unilever is one of them, indeed, and Coca-Cola and PepsiCo and all the plastic producers are joining us. And we are all for circular economy legislation. Let me stop there.
Okay, well, let's move on to Minister Travers George, if we would. Are you confident that INC 5.2 will enable countries to agree on global plastics treaty? And which provisions are most important to you in South Africa?
Yes, we do believe that INC 5 would be a step in the right direction. And we also recognize that the threat is huge. I mean, it's not only on land, it's also in the ocean. South Africa's view is you've got to take a number of things into consideration. And I think these are things that have been discussed over time also. Is firstly that all the decisions made must be based on science, and that this science must tell us about the impact that the products have on the environment. Now we know that they are having a negative impact. Also, we need to be open and transparent in sharing information. Given that, specifically if you look at the application of plastics in food, that is quite a significant issue that we need to be addressing. Also, that this new internationally legally binding instrument will likely result in the need for new regulatory controls domestically. We already in South Africa have mandatory rules regarding extended producer responsibilities. And so we've done that already in the cycle. What we do need to think on a lot more is rules, externally imposed rules, that would then require us to do something. So for example, if we're looking at capping, for example, that becomes problematic because you have to bear in mind the economy, the stage of development, etc. Having said that, of course, we absolutely believe that you do not want a polluted environment. You do not want harmful chemicals. That is not what you want. But the way to achieve it is to work with the business, to work with the community, and work like that. Because if you ban something, for example, you may not get the result you want. So that's the crucial point that we are making. Also, it was mentioned about the financial piece. Finance is vitally important. If you're going to do something, you change a system, you need money for it. And we as the G20 president have now raised the issue about the cost of capital. We pay a lot more for our capital in Africa than in the rest of the world. Why is that so? And that impacts very heavily on our ability to do something. So if we're going to be ambitious, we need the finances to back up the ambition. Hence the discussion on the cost of capital. So we will be raising that quite a lot. And also, fundamentally, we believe in a just transition. Everybody included, etc., nobody left behind. Everybody talks about that, but doesn't necessarily bear it as much in mind as they should. So we want to make sure that we can eradicate poverty as part of sorting out this problem. So, for example, we need to look at the most vulnerable people, the poor people. We need to look at women and people with disabilities, etc. Those people that have been left behind, and those people that are, it's the most difficult for people who are vulnerable to actually move into the first world way of managing everything. And we're very mindful of that. So in South Africa, we move together with everyone. And that's why that's on the top of our mind. But yes, absolutely, we believe it is very much possible. It's the way that it is done.
Thank you. And when we talk about all the parties at the table and the government negotiations, which are, of course, extremely important, and so many of the panels that I've covered, it is global multinational corporations that really push the lever. And that's why I want to ask you, Mr. Schumacher, what are the priorities you want to see? I mean, Unilever is obviously a huge player in plastics. And as a large corporation like that, you have a seat, figuratively, at the table. What would you like to see?
Yeah, I think, I mean, first of all, fortunately, we're not alone. So as you said, so, you know, we've been co-chairing a global business coalition that consists of more than 200 companies, actually, that has given input to the negotiators in this process. I mean, during not just INC 5, but I think in many rounds, actually. And I think business has been quite clear in what we want to achieve. You know, because fragmentation is actually not really helping business in the first place. At this moment in time, I mean, businesses have voluntary commitments. We have voluntary commitments. The good news about that is the voluntary commitments, those who have made voluntary commitments, and quite aggressive ones, have actually moved the needle. So that's good. So we've shown that it's possible to reduce virgin plastic intake. We've shown that it's possible to increase PCR and recycled plastic. We've shown that it helps to work with governments and companies on recycling. So it's good, but it's not enough. And it doesn't provide a level playing field. And because it's fragmented, it leads to additional cost in the value chain. So business-wise, it's just not a good situation. And that's something that we're very keen to resolve through the treaty. So going forward for the treaty, we believe it should not fail, cannot fail. So I'm very much with what Inger just mentioned. You know, a lot of the content, we support that. We would think about it pretty similarly. But if I would say the three big things are, and actually it's very much aligned with what just said, phase out and restrictions, and that's all about certain chemicals and material combinations that shouldn't be used. By the way, there are viable alternatives. There are. In the Consumer Goods Forum, the large companies have worked with lists of materials. We are able to phase them out already. So this is something that we can simply do. We also go for mandatory. I just said not voluntary, mandatory, and Mexico has been very instrumental in the leadership in that. So we're very grateful for that, because only then it's a level playing field. Then product design, design for recycling, and once again taking out the bad stuff. That's something that we should do. We have golden rules for that on the consumer goods side, and we absolutely would recommend to apply those. They already exist. They are ascribed by the majority of the large companies, so it's a matter of going. And then finally, we would like to see EPR schemes in the treaty. EPR meaning government initiated, regulated, but privately executed, because we believe that is the most efficient way to actually get to the goal, which is a true recycled world. So those are the three points. One last remark. We've been advocating a lot over the last couple of years, and I'm personally very passionate about the topic, and I believe we should continue to do that. But I believe that we have an opportunity now that the treaty was not established in Korea, but going forward, the change in our narrative should be more on the creation of jobs, because I believe that a level playing field in a predictable world is going to be a big impetus for companies to actually invest in new materials. I'm not sure you're going to tell us about that, in new materials, but also in new practices such as refill and reuse practices, for example. These are, and in R&D. So all of these is economic value creation. It's the right thing to do, and it's good for the economies. And I think that's something that has probably been a bit under... It wasn't probably as prominent in our advocacy before. I think we were more on the negative, on the defense side, but this is more an offense side, and I believe it's proving that that is very crucial as well.
And I want to get to the exciting new technologies. So first, if you could explain what Dioxycle does, so that everyone understands. And also, you know, as you're looking to scale these operations in the coming years, what are the challenges and the opportunities that you see ahead? And in addition, how can technologies like yours be made more available to the marketplace?
Great. Yeah. Yes, so I mean, first of all, there are two major pollution issues linked to plastics. The first one that we have been talking a lot about, and which is paramount and super important, covered by this treaty, which is waste management, plastic waste management. But there's also the pollution linked to the production of plastic. Because right now, if you take ethylene, which is the biggest, the most used petrochemical in the world and the most used ingredient for plastic in the world, it's made through a high temperature, highly emitting process that releases hundreds of million tons of CO2 per year in the atmosphere. And so that's the second problem that we focus on at Dioxycle. We clean up ethylene. We have invented a novel technology that instead of breaking down fossil feedstock, as it's done right now at high temperature, builds ethylene up from recycled carbon emission using renewable electricity. And so the technology we developed is called an electrolyzer, because it's a device that uses electricity to re-energize our carbon emission and turn this damaging emission into something we actually need. And so this is very important, because the opportunity around that is double. First, by displacing fossil fuel, virgin fossil fuel, to make ethylene, we can actually abate the equivalent of 1% to 2% of the world's emission. So it's huge. And second, The ethylene we make is a drop-in, molecularly identical chemical as the fossil one. And so it's very complementary to recycling, because if you think about the downgrading problem of recycling, where you're losing quality after a number of cycles of recycling, we need to have an additional source of carbon, renewable carbon, to basically fulfill the need of carbon we will need in all our chemicals for our everyday product in future. And so that's where we come in, alongside with other technology like biomass-derived carbon, to provide this new renewable carbon in the sphere, in the technosphere.
Interesting.
Very good.
So you've all put forth your optimism and your hopes and what you expect you can get from this treaty, but we always need to address risk. Because in any operation such as this, you have countries that, I hate to say it because I'm American, but are changing their views now on the clean energy transition, on all of the things we're doing to fight climate change, and all of the reuse and product development issues that we have. So I'd like to address risk, and perhaps, Mr. Schumacher, you could. What do you see as the main risks going forward in a treaty like this, and getting the entire world, as it is, when you have such a major economy that is not, can I say, climate forward?
Yeah. I think the major risk, and I think I sort of called it out a bit, is that eventually you would get to a heavily watered down, I mean, probably quite comprehensive agreement, but that is not leading to mandatory and clear rules. So, you know, leading to principles, leading to voluntary measures. And, you know, that expresses certainly a willingness, but I'm not sure that is going to really help us to make the progress that we would aim to see. So I think I'd rather see a treaty that is probably a bit smaller in, you know, in scope, but with clear mandatory rules around things that we can all agree on. And I believe there's a lot of common ground, actually, on the things that I just mentioned. I mean, who doesn't want, you know, the avoidance of problematic chemicals and so forth in plastics? I mean, who cannot agree on EPR systems in countries? Who cannot agree on certain design standards? I'd rather focus...
I could say Donald Trump if it's bad for his economy.
But, well, look, I was very encouraged as well. I mean, we talked. We are working in the United States. I mean, we're working on state levels. We're working with governors. Look, I mean, these are very good things to do. And once again, they provide jobs. If I look at EPR systems, we actually take a stake as a company, not only us, in recycling companies, so that the value of recycled materials actually, you know, there is value in that, because when you take a stake, an equity stake in recycling, you want to make money from that. There's nothing wrong with making money. It's a good thing to do. But if we can combine it with the principles that I just talked about, I think it has economic benefit. Hey, as I said, what I would like to, the risk is too much watered down, because I think then the agenda will be pushed out for another decade. So I'd rather go for something meaningful, probably a bit smaller, but very clear on the items where we can agree on.
And I'm also curious, if either of you, what risks you see.
Well, in our case, I think I share very much the risks that the CEO of Unilever is mentioning, because we need a treaty. That's what we need. Because if we don't have clear rules, then we don't have clear signs for the private sector. And I think that, at least in Mexico, we are demonstrating that when you have clear rules,
yes,
then the private sector comes in. Mm-hmm. And they really invest. As I said before, I think we are very much in the, I mean, I feel very proud what business sector is doing in Mexico, because the Mexico City, for example, with the systemic change scenario, they put a roadmap to replace 53% of currently generated plastics by 2040. So that's the regulatory, that's the rules, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. That's where we want to go. And we're going to provide all the incentives possible for the companies to come in and join. What's the risk I see is that the virgin materials are cheaper. Sorry to say, but I mean, your technology might be incredible, but still when you recycle PET, let's say, at the end of the day, the producers of bottles, you know, Coca-Cola, so forth, they still have to use a lot of virgin materials because they are cheaper.
Well, so if I may intervene, I think we can get there. So just our technology has reached unprecedented energy efficiency, and with that we really have a line of sight on cost parity. But we need capital to scale, because we need scale to reach these price points.
But for me, the risk is there, is how do we put the prices right to make sure that we are able to move forward in the circular economy? Because I really believe that circular economy can make very good business. We are pulling together in Mexico a circular economy park, and we are inviting business to come and join. But of course, the pet industry has a big plant in Mexico, which is Showcase, and we are going to, maybe you should come to join us, because
I'd love to.
I believe the problem is precisely that the virgin materials are still cheaper in the recycling process.
It's quite regional, though, I should say. I mean, yes, in North America and in America it is. There are other parts in the world where actually there is parity. I think, secondly, companies do have commitments for themselves on the use of PCR. So yes, there is an additional cost, but it's going to have to be a trade-off for companies. And thirdly, when it comes to packaging, the single biggest concern of consumers is not probably on necessarily when they make a purchase decision on climate, but packaging is an important decision, is an important factor when they buy a brand, yes or no. That's the research that obviously we've done. So I'm not trying to mitigate the issue, don't get me wrong, because it is very important. All I'm saying is, I think if we cooperate well between governments, regulations, what governments deem important, and we can stimulate the right systems around it, and as I said, government regulated, privately led, I think there is an economic benefit that can be obtained.
Now, the sector that I think is very risky, and I stop here, I promise, is health. Hospitals are the ones that are using plastics a lot. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
I think the biggest risk is that we lose sight of what the realities are. As you mentioned, the USA and Donald Trump, we're not entirely sure where that's going, but it's probably not going to be going in the right direction. But anyway, if you're asking everybody to agree for something, it's much harder than getting sufficient consensus to get together and then move forward and then find each other as you go along. So the process matters enormously. So if you are wanting to force anybody into it, it won't work. It is simple as that. What needs to happen, in my view, is that we need to find the common ground for everyone where everybody is. Everybody agrees that we don't want pollution. Everybody agrees you don't want chemicals killing people. We all agree that. The process we don't agree on necessarily, but it's all about the money, and it's all about the value add. As you said, Mr. Trump says, well, is it good for my economy? If it's good for your economy, watch how many people will run and do it. They will voluntarily do it.
Follow the money.
Absolutely. So that is the thing I think is the biggest risk, is that sometimes in treaty making, sight is lost of that. Because you've got to work with what you have and not with what you wish you have. So, for example, if everybody in the chain sees value, if somebody sees the value in a bottle lying over there, if they see value in picking it up and taking it away, they'll do that. But if there isn't value, they won't do that, because people respond to incentive. So I think that's possibly a risk that has not necessarily been thought about. And I think then the narrative starts to be, let's push, let's force. And people don't like that. Because if you're going to go in a process that's inclusive and transparent, then that doesn't work in the new world. What works is that there's a compelling reason to do it. And we've got to find that compelling reason. That's why South Africa, for example, we have got a very sophisticated process growing up now in terms of the waste pickers, making people feel part of the value chain. So it's valuable in picking up stuff everywhere and having it recycled. There's value. And our environment is getting cleaner. That is how we can move forward, I believe.
And just to get to the process, are both of you engaged in intersessional work? And what have you learned from other multinational treaties that can help you push this treaty forward?
Well, in my case, I think to bring all the stakeholders, I do agree very much with my colleague from South Africa. The problem is, I think we need to move faster. That's my you see what I mean? No, I'm really talking about the issue of, I think industry is ready. I think probably industry is more ready, I think, at least in the case of my country. I see industry is really pushing for innovation, for technology, for so forth. So we, the governments, have to move also in terms of the regulatory frameworks, the circular economy, for example, legislation. We have to put it together. And then I think the science and technology and the R&D that needs to come in, we need to bring everybody forward. So in the intersessional meetings, I would say we have to bring the best knowledge available on technologies, the best examples from the private sector, and try to see how we can exchange experiences from developing countries. We are a developing country as well. And many times our landfills, most of our organic waste or waste from the municipalities, 90% go to landfills. But plastic is no longer in the landfills because it has a value, because industry has placed a value on plastic. You see, this is the key. Industry.
You see, if there is a competitive advantage for business to do something, they will do it. So what is happening is that companies like Heinz, for example, there's a competitive advantage in moving ahead, because if you have that advantage, you'll be better off than your companies that are not moving faster. And also, I mean, regulation is always like that. Perhaps it's a bit like canon law. It takes a long time to catch up with what's happening actually in reality. But that's how governments work. They are slow by nature. Why? It's because you've got processes and you've got people you've got to consult with. It takes time. Business can move much faster. So if they find a compelling reason to move, they will. And then if others see that, hey, you're making more money than me because you're doing it better than I am, I want to be like you. And off they go. And that's how we certainly see in South Africa how that often is led by an innovation, and the law catches up a bit afterwards, because we know that, and as a lawmaker, I know that we are often not getting it right. So it's better for business to rush along, get stuff done, than governments say, you must do this, because we won't see it all, whereas business is much more efficient. And that's the great thing in a process like this.
Well, and I want to get to Hans, because we've seen a pullback in the business community. You can't say ESG anymore. It's become a bad acronym. And we've seen a pullback in commitments to net zero from large corporations. So in your world, you are very committed to plastics, to limiting plastics. But what are you seeing from your colleagues in the field?
No, I can't comment on, let's say, on particular commitments that other companies have made. And I think on ESG in general, let me give one example. I mean, we as a company, we have made up our priorities towards 2030, and we're focusing on 4 big priorities, which is climate, plastics, nature, and livelihoods. And we have set targets on all 4 of them. And we did that renewed approximately a year ago, or 1.5 years ago. And we proposed that to our shareholders in the annual shareholder meeting last year in April, under a climate transition action plan. And that was approved by our shareholders by 98.5%. So I see changes in tone, but at the same time, we have our priorities, I have my targets, I have consulted my shareholder base, and I need to take care for the long-term equity and the value of the brands that we develop and that we provide to consumers all around the world. I mean, every day, approximately 3.5 billion people around the world buy something from Unilever. If we don't have, ultimately, credibility on those brands, either because we are having bad packaging ideas, or we're doing the wrong things in our livelihoods where we operate and in the communities in which we operate, there are, I think, matters that governments can come and go, but that consumers will continue to pay great attention to. And that's the thing that motivates us, that motivates me to pursue an agenda that's not radical, but that makes business sense, and that is consistent with what we have talked about before.
And your consumers demand it, but how much do your actual employees demand it as well?
Of course, as I say, and when I talk
maybe your consumers as well.
Employees, consumers. I mean, sometimes corporations are referred to as sort of, these big things out there like a conspiracy. Look, Unilever exists of 130,000 employees. They go home every evening and they have families. I have 3 kids, teenagers, that hold me accountable. So it's a very human affair. You cannot underestimate that. We talked yesterday, a stakeholder capital. I mean, I'm all for capitalism, but a stakeholder capitalism, that idea in itself is definitely not gone. So we need to I think we need to chill a bit. And I think we need to look through some of the cycles. And again, I'm not proposing a radical agenda or whatsoever. I'm saying business sense. Work on the equity of your company, the reputation of your brands, and do what's right for the people.
And I just want to get to you, Sarah, because while we're hearing from one of the largest companies in the world, you're a very small company, cutting-edge technology. We touched on regulation. What would you like to see that would help your company to expand, to scale, to grow within this framework?
Yeah, I think there are 3 points that are very important to us. First, predictability of the regulatory framework. I think it has been said already. But for us, we are talking about physical assets. We are making chemicals. We need plants that are going to be amortized over 20 years. And so if there is no stability on what is promoted, not promoted, then we will never get to final investment decision on this plant. So that's the first thing that is very important to us. Second, I would say I'd like to see more of a technology agnostic approach in regulation. And what I'm saying is that it's very important that we set very clear, ambitious goals. But I don't think we should, policy should micromanage innovators.
Not pick favorites.
No, exactly. And don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we should just wait and sit, while hoping for technology to save us. No. Everything we have, every lever we have right now, whether it's low tech, whether it's like reusing plastic, reducing plastic, recycling plastic, all of that we should implement at the maximum scale possible. But for the few % of decarbonization that remain that cannot be solved by this, we should have a technology agnostic approach and be a bit Darwinist and say, okay, this is the rule, may the best win. Just to give you an idea, we started in 2021 with my co-founder David Wakely after 5 years of academic research at Stanford. We started with an electrolyzer of the size of a postage stamp, did a scale-up of over 3 orders of magnitudes to what is now what we believe is the biggest carbon electrolyzer, low-temperature carbon electrolyzer in the world, which is the size of a big car. And what's exciting is that it's a modular technology. So going from that to commercial is going to be about replicating the same unit. So what I'm trying to say here is that we are at this point in less than 4 years. And at the same time, when I read certain reports about, what are the technologies out there to get us out of this mess, we are not listed because we haven't had time to catch up with what is actually happening. So that's the thing I wanted to say. And the third thing I would like to say is perhaps a bit less ideology and more pragmatism in the regulatory framework. I'll give you an example. So we are, you've understood, we are a CCU, carbon capture and utilization technology. We, instead of extracting more fossil carbon, we take emission and recycle these emissions. And right now, if you take the European framework of the EU ETS, if a plant is emitting CO2 and we take that CO2 and convert it into ethylene, so it's not emitted anymore, this plant still has to pay for the EU ETS quota. However, if the same plant now is extracting fossil carbon to make that same plastic, because at no point of the life cycle it has been an emission yet, they don't have to pay. So not only are we not helped, but we are put at a disadvantage versus fossil carbon, which is a big joke. But I think it all comes from a good intention, which was we want to make sure there's no double counting, etc. But good intentions, don't always lead to a good result. So less ideology, more pragmatism. Have we taken a CO2 out from the atmosphere? Yes or no? And then we go from there.
Interesting. I wish we could continue to talk on this longer. I have so many more questions, but we're getting to the last couple of minutes, and I have the great honor of introducing some closing remarks from our final speaker, that is the president of Peru. So
Climate and
if we could have a little round of applause for the president of Peru, that is Gina Ercilia Boluarte. She will come up to give her closing remarks.
Muy buenos días con cada uno de ustedes.
Good morning. Let me congratulate the panel because this is a very relevant and interesting topic for our planet. The fact that we need to reduce more and more the use of plastics. And this is a responsibility of all the countries, all of the governments, and all of the human beings as well. Dear authorities from countries, dear friends, high executives and representatives from the private sector, ladies and gentlemen, the government of Peru is deeply committed to fight against plastic pollution and its devastating effects on health, biodiversity, ecosystem services, and the climate crisis. However, we must admit that plastics play an essential role in various sectors of our society, and these are fundamentals in varied fields such as health, as Alicia rightly mentioned it. So what are we doing about that? Containers for serum are hanging there, and is that vital? And that is vital for medicine, to provide medicines for the patients. Syringes are made of plastic. And if we go on and we estimate at a global worth, what do we do about that? Is that important for health? Yes, it is. How do we change the use of medical plastics so that health and the well-being of people are not being affected? How do we replace plastics? Do we go back to the previous ages that in the past we had to sterilize the syringes and we had to reuse them? Well, this is a major question for just this sector, such an important sector, which is the health sector. That's why we, in our country, we have embarked upon facing these needs in order to balance them: industry, consumers, protection of the environment. These are all very necessary actions. But we're not just talking about the health sector. Let's take a look at the consumption by human beings. Cookies, pastries, they're all wrapped in plastics. Sweets, candy, they're all wrapped in plastics. Drinks come in plastic containers. I think that beyond we can meet and have good intentions and write a timeline to meet our goals. We need to also write a timeline to see how long the companies, the laws by the governments. So how long can we go? When should we stop? Because otherwise, if we don't do that, this is going to be a vicious cycle, a never-ending cycle. This is a matter of necessity. In that regard, we need to place special focus on the right management of plastic waste in order to avoid the negative impact that are affecting not just our natural environment, but also our communities. We have talked in this panel about how to recycle waste in our homes. The municipalities are in the first line in order to have a training sessions in their own communities to bring to the houses classified containers for glass, plastic, cardboard, organic waste. It's a matter of culture in order to continue moving forward and in order to learn. This is a challenge that demands everyone's commitments, from the producing sectors all the way to every single citizen, in order to build together a more sustainable future, a more responsible future. As George said, it's not just a problem affecting our planet, the land, but the maritime environments. If we look at the oceans, the amounts of plastics that are accumulating there, how do we go about cleaning up our oceans? What do we do to clean up pollutants from our oceans? Right now, we're living at an age of constant innovation in which the development of new chemical substances is still growing, exponentially growing, as the representative from France just said it. Together with that, there's an increase of demand and production, and unfortunately, the pollution that all these are generating. In addition to that, we're facing the challenge of new emerging pollutants and networks of pollutants that are increasingly complex and interconnected. In that scenario, Peru took important steps in order to deal with problems such as a ban on plastics of single use and the regulation in the handling of different chemical inputs. As a result, as an example, in the supermarkets in the past, you would just put all the goods into plastic bags that you would take home. Nowadays, at the supermarkets in Peru, if you want to buy plastic that can be biodegradable, he or she needs to buy it. So this is what they're doing. Consumers, they bring their own tissue purchasing bags instead of buying biodegradable plastic each time. So it's part of the culture that needs to be promoted in order to avoid the consumption of plastic. So this is a result, and I just gave you very small examples. We're doing a lot more. This is an example that illustrates sustainable development. However, we're aware of the fact that this crisis goes beyond our borders, and it demands a global response. Without a regulatory global regime, the OCDE highlights that respect to 2019, by 2060, the production of plastic is going to be tripled, and 13% of waste in forms of microplastics are going to be dispersed in the ecosystems, and because the animals are going to be ingesting them, and as a result, human beings are going to be ingesting them. So that's why Peru has leveraged efforts in order to fight plastic pollution. In the 5th Assembly of the United Nations for the Environment, our country, together with Rwanda, presented Resolution 514 to end plastic pollution towards an internationally legally binding instrument. This transcendental step was the first one that led to negotiations to set up the global treaty that establishes the Intergovernmental Committee, the negotiating committee called INC, in charge of putting together that instrument, including its application, its enactment in the maritime environment. This committee has met up until November 2023. Right now, this responsibility is in the hands of Ecuador. Our vision on this instrument is clear. The future treaty has not only to mitigate environmental damage, but also it has to protect public health, in addition to slowing down and stopping pollution by plastics. The production of plastic has to have an added value, and these the impacts and to manage the impacts on health. That's why this instrument has to have ambitious measures from the beginning of the life cycles of plastics all the way to the disposal. A circular management from the production, use, and disposal has to be essential. In Busan, in Korea, between November 24th and December the 2nd, 2024, we actively participated on the 5th session of INC to draft an instrument. Peru, together with about 100 countries, held an interest to reach a legally binding instrument with control and implementation measures that reaches the whole life cycle of plastics, seeking environmental sustainability of our planets. The INC 5 wasn't enough to cover a text, to come up with a text that covered and met the expectations of all the participants. And that's the point. We need to reach consensus so as to establish the timeline and to win, to fight pollution in time. At the end of this, the plenary session on December the 2nd, we established that this should serve as a basis to resume the 5th round of negotiations at a date to be determined in 2025. We would love to have it in Peru so as to reach good consensus and to really set the timeline and the deadline. I would like to call upon action because the success of this treaty doesn't lie on the signed agreements, but on our collective willingness so that they become a reality. That's another detail, so that they become a reality. We do need to join efforts working together from every sectors in order to guarantee a future free from plastic pollutions where our boys and girls can grow up surrounded by a clean and healthy environment. And that is another issue. Toys are made of what? Plastic, of course. Peru, as always, is fully committed to this goal. We have demonstrated that with decision-making and effort, we can make a difference. This is the time to double our commitments and to lead, together with the whole world, this relevant change. Once again, let me congratulate this panel, and we hope that out of this event here in Davos, in order not to continue polluting our planet, our health, our life with plastics, and to protect the health of our children, we can double our efforts worldwide, and we can put an end. We can reach concrete agreements that can be enforced. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam.